I'm Mark Ruppert. I've been at Holland & Hart for almost 10 years now, hard as that is to believe. And I'm in the EENR practice group and in the best office in the firm, at least I think, Cheyenne. I served in the Air Force from 1983 until 2005, so about 22 years. And capacity is a hard question. I had 13 jobs and moved 10 times in those 22 years. And the Air Force gave me a variety of things to do. I was a general counsel, a military judge, I was a circuit prosecutor, I was even an HR person in the Pentagon responsible for 1,300 JAGS careers for a period of about 2 years. And so it was the variety they promised me. Actually, it goes way back to my uncles and my dad, who had all served in World War II. My uncles all served on combat ships in the Pacific, and my dad was in the 101st Airborne Division. In fact, if you've seen Band of Brothers, you've seen what he went through. He has 2 combat jumps. He was wounded several times. He is really, although he never talked about it to me as a child, a legitimate war hero. He earned the Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, 2 Purple Hearts. He was in combat for over a year. In fact, he was one of a handful of survivors from a company of 200 men who didn't make it back to the United States after World War II. And so they are my inspiration. As little as they talked about it, they talked about serving our nation and how proud they were of that, and I listened to them, and I wanted to be in that position someday. I decided to go to law school after I decided I was not going to join the military. Growing up, my sole goal in life was to join the Navy or join the Air Force and become a fighter pilot, and I wanted to go to the Naval Academy or the Air Force Academy. I didn't have perfect vision, so I had to come up with another career, and that was becoming a lawyer. So I went to law school at Ohio State University, which made sense since I was from Ohio, and went and practiced law in private practice in Michigan for about 2 years doing litigation before I found that there were military lawyers. I looked into it and decided that's the thing for me. I can be a lawyer and be a military officer and accomplish all my life goals in one fell swoop, which I decided to do for a 4-year tour and ended up staying for 22 years, which is a testament to how much I loved it. So service to me was drummed into me at a very early age, as I mentioned earlier, with my family and military service in particular. And in the Air Force, we live our lives by 3 core values: integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. And service before self meant something to me when I was joining the military as a new lieutenant. But service and service to others and service before self really took on new meaning in 22 years in the military, not so much for my career, but in watching others and people who dedicate their lives 24/7 to protect our nation and protect our citizens. Very smart, very gifted and talented people who put high salaries and other status on hold to serve the nation. And that was modeled for me by example. And I guess the best thing I could say about service before self that was modeled to me by example was on a flight back from Afghanistan in a C-17 transport, and from Afghanistan to Uzbekistan to Ramstein Air Base, Germany. I was in the cargo hold with several coffins of deceased military members who paid the ultimate sacrifice. That's what service before self really means, and I saw it modeled every day. I have many, many memorable moments from my career in the Air Force, and I could pick a handful to represent those that really are meaningful to me. I'd mentioned my time in Afghanistan. I was appointed as the lead for a team of investigators to investigate prisoner abuse in Afghanistan in the summer of 2004. And I had been in marginal combat zones before, but not full-blown combat zones. And to be there with other brave men and women and to see what our forces did and what people were willing to sacrifice in such a harsh place. And believe me, it's a frightening place. but to serve with other brave men and women in that combat environment and get something done that's important to our nation, to show that we live by the rule of law, was really maybe my most memorable event during my 22 years in the Air Force. There are others, though, going back. I recall when I was in Germany and I had my family with me and we went through Checkpoint Charlie and the Berlin Wall, and the soldiers tapping their guns on the windows of my car, because in East Germany, West Germany at the time, this was 1988 and the wall was still up, of course, it was just as if it was the end of World War II in 1945, and everybody lived by that anachronism. And so I recognized Soviet soldiers. I did not recognize East German soldiers, and so there was this game to see if they could get me to recognize them, and my orders were to drive through Checkpoint Charlie and ignore the East German soldiers regardless of the harassment that you're going to get. And at first my sons were scared, and then they thought it was great and a big game as we went through the wall. But then when we got through the wall and walked around East Berlin, I can't tell you the number of citizens who looked pretty ragged who tugged on my uniform, because I had to wear my full dress uniform in East Berlin, and simply said, "We're glad you're here." There are other memories. I mentioned my dad earlier. When I pinned on Colonel toward the end of my career, my father came to my promotion ceremony, and he was one of the few survivors, as I mentioned, in his company in the 101st Airborne Division. And after the ceremony at night and everyone went to bed, and he and I were sitting around the kitchen table, he looked at me and he said, "I've been trying to figure out for 50-some years why I survived, and I figured that out today." As I recall my years of military service, I'm really most proud of the people that I mentored and helped do what the Air Force tells its leaders that we are charged to do, and that is bring up those behind you, make sure that they can do what you do, and if you're a success, make sure they can do it better than you do. I did what I was taught. I had the most fantastic mentors that mentored me and trained me to do what they did, and I passed that on, and many of the people that I trained and mentored went on to make Colonel, General, Chief Master Sergeant, won Air Force level awards, and through their efforts, not mine, but it was a privilege to be a part of that. I chose Holland and Hart for several different reasons. My last duty assignment in the Air Force was here at Francis E. Warren Air Force Base in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I wanted the same high-speed, challenging law practice that I had enjoyed for the last 22 years, the kind of practice that kept me in. I thought there's no way I'm going to find that in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I'm going to have to go back to Washington, D.C. or some large city to do what I want to do and continue to enjoy the kind of sophisticated clients that I have had for the last 22 years and the kind of practice that's going to challenge me. And the people in this office were what sold me the practice. That's great. And 10 years later, as I look back on it, I haven't been disappointed. It's been a blessing. I certainly appreciate when people found out that I served in the military and thanking me for my service. But I said at my retirement, and I'd like to take the opportunity to say again, that the real people who serve and sacrifice are not the people like me who raise their right hand and swear an oath to the Constitution and to our nation, and then go about willingly and voluntarily performing that service. But it's our families that we drag along with us. And so my wife and my two sons and my daughter have been dragged to places all over the world. And thankfully, they're all right back here in Cheyenne with me. But as I said at my retirement, and I'll say again, those are the people that really need to be thanked. And so if you have the opportunity and you meet a military spouse or a military brat that had to go around the world, thank them too, because they didn't raise their hand and voluntarily put up with that. They just got dragged along and did it anyway. So I thank them. I'd ask other people to do that too.